Welcome to Block and Build, a podcast from Convergence Magazine. I'm your host and the publisher of Convergence, Cayden. On this show, we're building a roadmap for the movement that's working to block the impacts of rising authoritarianism while building the strength and resilience of the broad front that we need to win. This week on the show, I talked to three Floridians who are part of a progressive front in a state that often goes overlooked. My guests are Florida State House Representative for the 13th District and U.S. Senate candidate Angie Nixon, President of the Climate Equity Action Fund and former Executive Director of Florida Rising, Andrea Cristina Mercado, and Florida labor organizer with SEIU and other organizations, Eric Bracken. This panel is a follow-up and deeper dive on Convergence's recent print series, Insights from Florida, about why their red state strategy and resilience is vital to our democracy. There will be links to the print series in the show notes. But first, of course, these headlines. Last week, I talked about the arrest and the pending extradition case in Spain against Fergie Chambers, and immediately after we recorded last week's episode, Marco Rubio's State Department dropped a 100-page memo about how Cuba is supposedly a powerful epicenter of left-wing activity driving anti-American organizing across the country. I don't think I need to remind listeners of this show that the U.S. blockade of Cuba has put the lives of people on the island in truly dire circumstances. Scarce fuel and medicine means ongoing blackouts and a lot of danger for Cuban residents. The material conditions in actual Cuba gives lie to how foolish this report truly is. Not only that, but more than half the report focuses on the past, Cuba's role on the international stage and its support for groups on the left between the 1950s and 1970s feature prominently as part of the State Department's case for Cuba's status as the, quote, capital of 21st century communism. The whole thing gives the impression that they're grasping to bolster a straw man in order to attack their political enemies in the United States in 2026. That said, just because it is stupid does not mean that it's not dangerous. The report names individuals and organizations ranging from electeds with movement history like Zoran Mamdani and also the liberal mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass, to Black Lives Matter, to the DSA, to Neville Roy Singham, the tech founder and leftist donor who supports a number of organizations, including Code Pink and the People's Forum. They're working hard to imply a much larger and more coordinated conspiracy of supposed communist sympathizers who are working to undermine the United States. And while it reads like a conspiracy theory fever dream, it's part of this bigger project, labeling the actual or perceived enemies of the Trump administration as domestic terrorists. And as much as I wish I could just laugh this off, it is about undermining the legitimacy of those people and organizations so that law enforcement and intelligence agencies can justify surveilling, repressing, and disorganizing our movements. The conclusion of the report makes Rubio's project here very clear. The threat of Cuba and of this strawman communism is a threat to, quote, Western civilization, deployed in the report with no elaboration or context. In this imaginary, the quote-unquote West is not a place. It's a way of being, not even a philosophical, but an ideological tradition. It's, quite frankly, a cipher for white Christian nationalism. Anything that threatens their blood and soil project needs to be purged from the American body politic, and we should not countenance any of it. Our friends over at PRISM have done some great reporting on the rise of hunger strikes in ICE jails in order to fight back against violations of due process and the inhumane conditions that detainees are facing. These strikes have been happening in facilities across the country, including in California, Michigan, New Mexico, and New Jersey, with hundreds of detainees participating. According to advocates, ICE has been denying the validity of some of these reports and quickly breaking strikes up through sometimes forceful coercion, which means that the number of strikes could actually be much higher. We recommend that you all read the rest of PRISM's report, which will be posted in the show notes. And finally, last week in India, the nation's education minister resigned as the result of a demand from the so-called Cockroach Janta Party movement, a satirically named movement of young people and students deriving its name from a comment by the nation's chief justice, who recently described unemployed youth as, quote, cockroaches. The movement, which is powered by parody and self-deprecating humor, both in name and in action, is squarely taking aim at Narendra Modi's Hindu fascist BJP, which has been in power for over a decade. Protests have also been fueled by hunger strikes by a high-profile educator who is supporting the movement. A primary demand of the protesters revolves around medical school entrance exams, which around 2 million students were forced to retake after some exam questions were leaked. Protesters claim that dozens of suicides of students, citing the pressure of retaking the exam as the cause, resulted from this debacle, and they're currently seeking restitution for families of the deceased. In the meantime, they're being pleasantly surprised by the government's willingness to negotiate and meet some of their demands, including the resignation of that education minister. Like many of the so-called Gen Z protests we've talked about on the show before, young people taking the streets in Delhi have been backed up by parents, by educators, and even some celebrities, who are people who might not have been previously willing to stand up to Narendra Modi's Hindu nationalist government. I've been following this story in Himal, South Asian, and really encourage you to get this on your radar too. We'll link to more in the show notes. When people outside of the state think of Florida politics, they often think of the de facto MAGA headquarters, that is Mar-a-Lago, or the reactionary policies of Ron DeSantis, things like book bans, LGBTQ discrimination, climate change denial, and more. In other words, the state is a lost cause for any kind of progressive movement. But in reality, Floridians have been part of a powerful and unique fascism-fighting force that has united communities across difference to fight for labor rights, racial justice, voting rights, LGBTQ rights, and more, standing up to powerful organizations and supporting champions from local government to Washington, D.C. Following up on our recent series, Insights from Florida, available on our website now, we talked to 3 Floridians who are part of this continuing fight and who are also contributors to that series. You can read the whole series on our website at convergencemag.com. In this conversation, we had the opportunity to go a little deeper on some of the work proposed in those articles and building towards what's next for movement work in Florida and beyond. On today's panel, I'm joined by State House Representative and current U.S. Senate candidate Angie Nixon, nonprofit and climate justice leader Andrea Cristina Mercado, and veteran labor organizer Eric Bracken. We'll talk about how the progressive movement in Florida has been fighting back and what they think can get the state and other states that often get written off in national political calculus out of the grips of MAGA. Take a listen. I'm joined now by Florida State House Representative for the 13th District and U.S. Senate candidate Angie Nixon. Representative Nixon, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
We're also joined by the president of the Climate Equity Action Fund and former executive director of Florida Rising, Andrea Cristina Mercado. Andrea, thanks for making the time.
No, thanks for the conversation.
And finally, we're also joined by 25-year Florida labor organizer with SEIU and more, Eric Bracken. Eric, thanks for joining us as well.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I want to start simple. Florida is one of kind of like the major states that has developed this kind of political and cultural reputation amongst commentators from other places as being like a little bit of a political lost cause. And the thing that we really wanted to do with this series on Florida is look at the ways in which that is not true and that like really important organizing is happening and teach people about what you all have learned through your experience organizing in Florida. So I want to start out with like, what are the things that you wish people understood more about Florida, about Floridians, that kind of counter those narratives and assumptions? Angie, I'll throw to you first.
Yeah, for sure. So I would say that what I want folks to know about Florida is that we have some of the best organizers in the country. That we saw this huge divestment from our state in 2020, and that is because in 2018, we got so close to the governor's mansion and electing a progressive candidate, a progressive Black man. And instead of leaning in like would be normal because we got so close, what we saw was a huge divestment from our state. And then that just trickled down from electoral and work to like organizing as well. But what's remarkable is that we still were winning on issue-based campaigns, right? Even after that. So in 2020, we raised the minimum wage. We were able to do that with a citizen-led ballot initiative. And we've also been able to kind of like lessen the blow of really bad bills. And we've been able to, grow our organizations and the leaders within our organizations. But, we just need support. And what's frustrating is that people kind of leave us out of the conversation when it comes to the South, but we are ground zero for all of the bad legislation that goes to other state houses and then becomes federalized on a national level.
No, just to add on what Angie's saying, that's like less than 10 years ago that statewide races in Florida were lost by less than half a percentage point. Like, we're not talking about like lost by 2 points, 3 points, 4 points. We're literally talking about like 30,000 votes. And, and on the statewide minimum wage that we won, Florida is now the only state in the South with a $15 minimum wage. And that includes states in the South like Virginia that have Democratic trifectas. Mm-hmm. So, I think it bears just like repeating that it's really troubling to see Florida written off. So many people's and so many donors like political maps or the possibility to win when a majority of county commissions have progressive majorities when you look at our largest cities in the state.
Eric, what about you? What do you think about when you think about like things that you wish people would understand about the political context in Florida and Floridians?
Well, I think for one, we're resilient. We've been through a lot. And it is true that, that 2018 election was really a big pivot point in the state where the right came away from that. And they said, this is too close for comfort. We lose a state, we lose a country. And we need to double down and we need to pioneer a lot of what we're now experiencing on a national level in terms of suppressing votes, arresting people for exercising their rights to vote, for cracking down on organizations who are trying to register voters. We're seeing that across the country now. Passing laws left and right that make people feel, many different communities feel uncomfortable to be here, right? And, within all of that, we've learned a lot of lessons, experienced a few of these things a few years before many other people in the country have started to experience them. And this is not the first time in history that our movements have been attacked and that, we've faced crackdowns on democracy. And, and all through that, I think what we've tried to do is to learn from people before us and be inspired by their wherewithal and ability to keep going and find a way.
I'm also curious a little bit about sort of like what led up to that 2018 gubernatorial election. Like, what was that organizing like? And like, what did it kind of grow out of? What can we kind of learn from like that push that's like, because it seems to me that like, as somebody who's never lived in Florida, that like there has been this like a trend of sort of like the far right trying to like take government power in Florida and use it. So could you talk a little bit about the run up to the 2018 gubernatorial election? What kind of organizing went into that at all? What was it that scared the far right so much about that moment?
I mean, Angie started the conversation just naming that there's like some really phenomenal organizers in this state and organizers who have seen a lot of things and been through it. And I think what you see after 2008 and 2012, you see Florida going statewide for Obama, for the first Black president. And then you see the backlash of the Republican Party and a concerted attack on voter registration in particular, and on community organizing. And I think in the face of those attacks, there was also organizations coming together, organizations like that weren't always necessarily friendly or friends. Like in every state in the country, it's true that there's like turf battles and infighting and personalities. And I think there was a real commitment, particularly after the 2016 election, that was so devastating. I think there was a real commitment for organizations to figure out how is the sum, like how are we greater than the sum of our parts, and how are we clear around like division of labor and lanes, and with a state that's as massive as Florida, we're talking about 14 media markets, 26, it's 26 county. It's a massive state with so much ground to cover. So, organizations coming together in a room and being clear around where we were going to focus our organizing and what was our path to, while Florida was going at the state level for progressive candidates, we still had like deep entrenched conservatism in the state legislature. So, I think those were some of the ingredients leading up to 2018. I was looking over at Angie and Eric, who are people that I got to know in that lead up to the 2018 electoral cycle, and I'm sure have their own perspectives and stories to share and battle wounds.
Yeah, Eric, I'm also really curious about the sort of role of unions in that lead up too, that like, we often hear this narrative of the South as like a deeply anti-union part of the country. What has your experience been like with SCIU in Florida, and what it's been like organizing people on job sites there?
There's a lot of people who need change in the state, and so across party lines, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's been a lot of successful organizing of workers across race, class, party lines. The union that Angie came out of, which I wrote about a little bit in my piece in Convergence, was the Florida Public Services Union. And they, have been very creative for, under the leadership of Alfonso Mayfield and a FIFA colleague, who I co-wrote the piece with, and Alfonso, who we wrote about, were, just very creative about, trying to break through all the constraints and all the ways that the law and that the economy here is tilted against workers. So, whether that, Angie led a massive organizing drive that maybe she'll want to talk about later, of adjunct faculty workers that, was, part of that union. That's the same union that was trying to organize Uber drivers at one point, or, they come out of representing public services, school, blue collar school and city employees. I organized janitors 2 decades ago to, go on strike and ultimately hunger strike to win. A lot of those janitors who were, Cubans and people kind of look at, that demographic and say, well, they're all conservative and right wing, but they were, incredibly militant, fighting to do better than make $6 an hour and no health insurance, and incredibly committed. So, that period in the lead up to 2018, certainly for SCIU, was, a doubling down of investment in Florida, in both organizing campaigns. Also, I led a project for a little while that came out of the SCIU Fight for a Fair Economy program in the mid 2010s that was, beginning to dabble in organizing communities around where our workers lived. And ultimately, we called that an SCIU, the Community Union, that we wanted to organize workers to not just be leaders in their work site, but also leaders in their neighborhood as well. And so just a lot of creativity. And then ultimately, what Andrea mentioned before, the $15 an hour minimum wage, was won by ballot initiative, but the path was paved by fast food workers and childcare workers and home care workers going on strike, doing civil disobedience, occasionally getting arrested. So that's the kind of spirit that's here in the state.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. Angie, I do also want to sort of look at the way in which you came out of movement, right? Like with your background as an organizer, with your involvement in organizing, and like how that led you to think about running for state legislature, as part of this like longer arc of like, how do we really build power for our people, and what your sort of path through being an organizer and into the state legislature has looked like over this period of time.
Yeah, so thank you for that question. I think it's important to highlight that I didn't want to run for office. I had ran for office previously for city council and I didn't win. And then I learned about community organizing after the fact and became an organizer with then Florida New Majority, and then met up with the unions and became a union organizer and all the things. And I decided to run for this seat. It was District 14 at the time, because the person that was in office was not accessible. They weren't ethical. They weren't doing what Floridians and what the district needed. And so, working in movement and in labor, we always talk about how we have to, pressure the electeds and we want them to do this, and like how we build power and all the things. And I was just trying to find people to run. And then finally I said, no one wants to run and no one has the values that I have and the values that my community has and these organizations that I came up through have. So let me just run. And I was able to unseat an incumbent, being outspent like 5-1
Wow.
while pregnant with COVID, right? And so I was able to do that because of the infrastructure that we had built and the leadership that we had built in the community, and also like folks knew who I was because I was working to build that infrastructure, right? And so we were able to win. And so fast forward to now, the U.S. Senate race, and I'll go back to like the state house. But in the U.S. Senate, it's the same thing, right? Like I didn't want to run for this seat. I was trying to find people to run. And then I'm like, no one's running. Or the people that are running don't share our values. Okay, shit, let me do it again. It is the exact same date of election day when I won the first time. So August 18th is going to be my election date this year. And it was August 18th back in 2020. But in regards to like my advocacy and how I show up as a state lawmaker, I only run bills that come from the people. I vote in support of the people. There have been times that I have been the lone no vote out of 120 members because I felt like this was going to harm my community. That is the way that I approach lawmaking, right? Like I believe that hardworking everyday people should shape what our communities look like and what our economies look like. And that is what Alfonso Mayfield preached. And therefore, I only put forth legislation that can improve the lives of everyday people. I don't put forth legislation that can make corporations richer or that can preempt local governments and the communities from the things that they want. And so that has brought me the rage and side eye from the Ron DeSantis and the Republican supermajority. And even at times it has put me at odds with members of my caucus because I had to tell some of them one time, I don't care about campaign donations. Like, I don't care. Like, what good is it for me? What good does it do for me not to use my platform even when it's uncomfortable? Even when it's hard? Like too often they're like, oh, well, I can't say this because I won't get reelected. If you're supposed to say it or you're supposed to do it because it's the right thing to do it and will help improve lives, that's what you're here for in the first place. And I think that's why I've been able to always ward off opposition, even though they try to make it seem as though I've been ineffective, right? They stopped allowing me to have appropriations. I have to get Republicans to run my bills now because they wouldn't let me, pass law. And so it's like, even with all of that, right? People see me working hard and advocating for them, and that's what they want. And that's why, like, I'm always pushing. I've pushed my caucus more to the left a little bit, which is crazy that I have to do that. But that's why I tell them, like, what happens in these chambers ain't real. It has real consequences, but what happens outside the chambers are real. And those are the people that we have to answer to. And so we should act like it.
I think also thinking about who's outside the chamber and like who you're really answerable to. Eric, I do want to ask you a little bit more about community unionism and the sort of framework of the community union, and also to talk a little bit about your late comrade Alfonso, because I feel like his presence looms large in the series, and he was clearly a very powerful leader. So I invite you to talk a little bit about that.
Well, all of us on this call were incredibly close to Alfonso and considered him brother, sister, close friend. So his passing early this year is just an immeasurable loss. He was someone who was able to really see beyond the moment that we're in whatever moment that we were in, and to kind of see a North Star that, in many ways, a lot of other people couldn't always see. And that gave him a lot of creative license to think about how to accomplish the work that we're trying to do. I think he really was guided by ultimately a core belief that people and communities should be able to direct and both own and direct the way that their communities are built and develop. And, much like Angie said before, that people should be able to have control over the decisions being made in their own lives. And, toward that end, he was really focused as a union leader that, there are a lot of constraints in terms of what unions are able to win, especially public sector unions, especially in the South, especially in a right to work state. And he, in getting to know his members, who are all very working class, did studies with them about, what, how far their finances stretched, how, were they having to take out, payday loans, how were they able to afford, rent and housing, and, how were they accumulating wealth? And obviously, Florida is one of the states that was part of the Confederacy. He was very clear that the ideas and structures of the Confederacy have never been really vanquished. And until they are, we're going to continue to experience, this kind of extreme inequality and suppression of, the needs and desires of communities in places like Florida, but also that has outsized impact on the entire country. As long as the South is undermining democracy, not only here, but for the country at large, the country can't move forward. So he, was just incredibly creative about thinking about new ways to deal with the challenges of the Confederacy and ultimately the way that it has historically extracted wealth from Black communities. He saw that in order to challenge that he needed to do more than bargain for higher wages in a union contract, but needed to get involved in how do communities, be able to shape development in their neighborhoods? How do they resist gentrification? How do they build new vehicles that, can be nonprofit vehicles, it can be for-profit vehicles. He one time said it can be nothing at all. It can just be a few of us sitting around in a coffee shop. But how do we have a North Star of really being centered in our people's lives, qualitatively getting better? Do they have more control over their lives? Can they, afford more things for their families and for their futures and for the next generation? And, that's how he was guided and had all sorts of creative ideas to how to get there.
And the community union vision sort of comes out of that insight?
100%. Yeah. He kind of interrogating how do we deal with people's concrete economic everyday realities, came to the conclusion that it wasn't enough to just be involved at the work site, that the union needed to be involved in the neighborhoods and communities that people lived in. And by being involved, he meant help communities both figure out how to win, even under extremely difficult conditions, some measure of political power, but then how do we also help communities win in various forms, economic power, and how do we build structures that will allow for that to happen for generations to come?
I think, Andrea, I also want to toss you a question about the piece that you wrote for us, which trying to thread a little thread here, but you wrote a lot about sort of the strain of doing work to block the flood of far-right attacks on a lot of the things that communities have built in an environment like Florida, and the sort of risks that organizers face around burnout and the resource drain in trying to take on those challenges. Thinking about what you've seen movement build in Florida, what do you think some of the lessons are moving through, especially the last 8 years of really intense challenge to everything that movement has built? And what advice would you give to organizers who are struggling?
Appreciate the question. It's one that's really near and dear to my heart because I've thought a lot as someone who's been in movement for now 30 years, coming on 30 years. just how do we sustain ourselves, and how do we remember that like hope is a discipline, like the belief that another world is possible, and then like the steadiness of like putting one foot in front of the other, even on the hard days, you know? And Eric, always appreciate you lifting up Alfonso and the piece that you and Afifa wrote about Alfonso. Alfonso was our board chair at New Florida Majority and Florida Rising, and a close friend and partner in the work. And, you know, and I think I remember Alfonso as someone who was like the biggest cheerleader. Like he was the person that you went to and you just knew that you felt that he was in your corner. Unlike beyond the institution that you sat at, that we had to have relationships as like human beings. Yeah, so I hold those lessons really close. And I think for anyone who's doing movement work in this like incredibly challenging time, it's like having a circle and having like a trusted circle, which is something that, you know, all of us on this call have built with many others who are not here with us today, like of people that you believe want you to succeed and that you can be vulnerable with and you can talk to on like your worst days, but also will be there to like celebrate it with you on the great ones. You know, like victories are like, they're few and far between. And I think sometimes we like rush past a victory to just like, work is like the mountain of work. It is never ending. It's the work of many lifetimes. And I think it's one of the things that I think I lifted up in the piece towards the end is like, we absolutely have to celebrate our victories. And it's like not only to sustain us in the work, but also it's so important that the community understands what we've won, right? Like when the message from the status quo is you can't win, you'll never win, it's not possible. Like we can't afford to let our victories slip away. Like people in Florida need to know that when they get their paycheck and it's $15 an hour, that's because that's not come like out of the goodness of some politician's heart. Like that happened because we like fought for it and we knocked on millions of doors and had conversations with gazillions of people. Or it's like when Eric talks about the janitors who went on hunger strike to win healthcare benefits. You know, like it's our responsibility to tell those stories and to celebrate those victories, not just in the moment that we win them, but actually like how do we keep telling those stories and make sure that new generations of people coming into movement understand like everything that we've won.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think this relational piece is so important. And honestly, part of the reason that we were like, we should do a panel with a group of folks. And I'm curious a little bit about like both through struggle and otherwise, like how you all and your organizations have been able to like build relationships both as organizations, but also as individuals. Like, are there things that sort of stand out to you as I don't know, like important touch points in building that kind of trust and that kind of community around ideas and power building that's been important to you?
It's been intentional. Like we have to make time as organizational leaders, as leaders just in the movement, to make sure that we are not allowing just the organizational 5-year, 10-year, 1-year plans or whatever be the North Star, but that we always continually have to agitate ourselves to come back to like our collective North Star as a state. And so it's been hard. It hasn't been all sunshine and rainbows. And then especially since there have been some transitions and movements as it relates to leadership within the organization. But we have to be continually reminded and intentional about meeting and coming back to the plan and the North Star and the goals.
I don't go to Jacksonville without stopping in Angie's bookstore.
I want to know about the bookstore too, as like a sort of like community touch point. Was this something that like came out of organizing and being like, we need space, or?
Yeah, so the bookstore is not only a bookstore, it is a community hub. Ron DeSantis banned books. I opened up a bookstore, but I also decided to open it up because the state of Jacksonville, we did not have a safe space, a place where we could organize and build power that was also intersectional, and it is a place where we are also able to come and like have tough conversations like between the trans community and like the Black community. It is also a place where we use it to provide things like free Plan B. We do free mental health workshops, free tutoring, free mentorship programs. And we also do that because we want to use it as an organizing tool to really let folks know, like we start asking questions, right? Like, do you have access to healthcare? Are you registered to vote? And then we agitate people about, well, you know, the situation that they are in right now is based on whether or not a certain person is in office, right? And also what's interesting to note is that we are had a corner to an early voting site and an election day polling site as well. And so, yeah, it's pretty cool that we have it.
Yeah, I'm interested to know a little bit more about what infrastructure looks like. I think the bookstore is a great example of it. But like, what are the creative ways in which you've had to think about building infrastructure for movements, especially in a time of like a lot of backlash from the state? Andrea, I see you nodding. I'm curious.
Yeah, I have two examples that come to mind. One is like, I just don't think that there's a replacement for like regular scheduled like time together. And part of the Florida for All like statewide alignment group that we started, it meant, 7 executive directors talking every single Friday for 2 hours. And then like we did in-person retreats like every other month or at least once a quarter. That was like a day and a half. And I just think that that's what it takes to have like a deep level of trust and alignment and coordination and shared work across different organizations with their own organizational identity and priorities. And then like the other one that comes to mind in terms of like infrastructure is in Miami, there's been like a group of a long-term visioning project, the Miami Horizon Project. And I think what's interesting about that grouping is that it's like irrespective of your role in an organization, it's kind of like a coalition of the willing, kind of a space of like who has an appetite and a hunger to engage in some like long-term work together where we can dream together and envision Miami in many decades and even generational project, and then slowly do the work of like really thinking about what is the work we do today, like how is it helping us to advance us towards our real dreams. So I lift those up, I think, as 2 different examples. I think infrastructure takes so many different shapes and forms, but if it's not like brick and mortar, like a bookstore, then it's like, how do we create like that brick and mortar type stability of space with like consistency of time and gathering and people?
Totally. No, I that thinking about the sort of like time commitment to one another is something that's like honestly amazing, that like being able to like say yes to each other to spend that kind of time together is like not a minor undertaking by any means. That like there are a lot of ways in which the like day-to-day work pulls people in different directions, but prioritizing relationship is like that's huge. Eric, I don't know if you have other thoughts about
well, Andrea said before that, it's true, as we kind of went down this path, we started from a place where there was not necessarily a high level of trust or closeness between everybody. And, that led to, the different kinds of factional problems that you can see in many places. Of course, this was at a time where everyone did consider Florida to be a very competitive place, right? And the kinds of investments here, unfortunately, would come very episodically, usually just a couple of months before an election. But, the problems that we're having now are different problems. But, in the absence of having that strength of trust and relationship, sometimes lots of outside attention and resources can only magnify those problems and or lack of trust. And so, at some point, I recall conversations where, we, as Andreas mentioned, Obama had won here a couple of times, but, on the whole, we're still a state that's has a conservative governing majority now for 3 decades. And, in order to figure out how to win concrete things for communities that we're fighting for, we kept running up against all sorts of obstacles and trying to think about that as separate siloed organizations. And I remember at one point of extreme tension, just kind of, a set of folks, really reconciling, it's not like there's anyone else, right? There's no set of other, set of organizations that are going to magically come up and magically figure this out. We are the ones who have to do this if we want to forge a new path here. And that meant intentionally deciding to move into some conversations that up front felt very uncomfortable, right? That meant reconciling old hurts. But through that, people in expressing vulnerability and openness and a willingness to lean in together developed a sense of closeness where you talked about the lead up to 2018. We used, a few years after, we started that process, we talked about the level of trust we had being the source of all of our strength and being the thing that allowed us to think much bigger than we could possibly do in our own organizational silos. And so it's not easy, but it was essential, and we, couldn't have both made the kind of upswing that seemed to be happening a decade ago, but also withstood all of the challenges of the last few years without that.
Yeah, no, I think that's advice well taken, that relationship is really the foundation of a lot of infrastructure in a really deep way. I think as we sort of wrap up here, one of the things that I would love to hear from each of you is what sort of advice and insight that you really want folks in other states to hear, especially those states who are sort of following Florida down this authoritarian path, in terms of what you've learned, the challenges that you faced, and also the successes that you've been able to win for your communities.
Well, I think that, to what I just said, invest in our relationships first, before strategy, because, that is going to be the thing that is going to hold, the possibility to keep going together. I think Alfonso, even in the moment of extreme challenge, we should hold a very audacious vision about what kind of world we're trying to build, and use that vision to liberate us to pursue, as many strategies or vehicles towards our North Stars we think are needed. And, ultimately, what I keep reminding myself in these moments, and, another leader in our ecosystem, says, we don't choose the era that we're born in, right? And, none of us would have chosen to go through what we've gone through here these last few years. But we're doing work that outlives all of us, right? And I think that Alfonso's passing earlier this year really puts a very fine point and reminder of that ultimately, Martin Luther King said that, the arc of the universe bends towards justice, but it takes a long way to bend. And, the things that we're doing now should hopefully be stepping stones for people who are going to experience the world that we may not see.
Right on. Angie?
I would say that the advice that I would give to folks is be prepared for the worst, but do it anyway. Because we have to. This is our country, and we deserve to decide what we want it to look like. Don't give away our power and just allow those folks who are in power to stay there, because it's clear that they don't have our best interest, the community's best interest at the forefront of their minds. It actually seems as though it's cruelty is the point right now. And so I would say, be strategic, of course, plan things out, but also don't allow perfection to stop you. We literally are in a fight for our lives. Literally. We are witnessing them trying to return us back to the worst chapters of our history. We are witnessing them weaponize agencies. And throughout the history of throughout the history of this country, we faced oppression, but that oppression was always met with resistance. The country's founding was from oppression from England, and it was met with resistance. They threw tea in a harbor, right? And then the Civil War, oppression met with resistance. The labor movement, oppression met with resistance. Civil rights, Stonewall, women's rights, oppression met with resistance. And so right now, they trying to keep us down. And so now it's time for us to be loud, not just go high when they go low, but to be loud and to meet their oppression with resistance.
Amazing. Yeah. Andrea?
Thank you, Angie and Eric. And, I think I would just close by saying, people give their lives to this work. We put so much of our heart and our energy and our spirit and our time into advancing a better world for our families and our communities. And that's a sacred responsibility. So the work is never easy, and none of us are perfect. We're all going to make missteps and mistakes. And I think we're really quick to latch on to the mistakes and missteps of others. But keep bringing yourself back to your core values and our shared collective responsibility. And just find, it's get in where you fit in. Domestic workers used to tell me, it's everyone puts their little granito de arena, everyone puts their little grain of sand. And so how do we be humble about our offerings, but also be bold and audacious of working and advancing towards our dreams. I'm really grateful to Convergence for featuring Florida in this way. And Cayden, thank you for everything that you do to uplift the stories of organizing. Because I think it's so important that we tell our stories and that we reflect on our lessons. And so I'm really grateful for the opportunity.
Yeah, no, thank you all.
I'm sorry, I have one other thing to add, and it goes back to what Andrea stated earlier in regards to celebrating, not just telling. She said tell people our victories, but I think it's also celebrate our victories, and also in this fight, in this resistance, we got to be joyfully resistant. And I just think about my ancestors, right? They dealt with a lot, but they always had that one Sunday where they go to church, but they'd also dance. And so we have to find joy in places because it's so hard, and this work does get hard. But we have to find joy in places where we can, so that we can keep moving and know and realize that this is what we want our kids to have and our great grandkids to have, to experience more of. And so we have to have joy.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Angie, Andrea, Eric, thank you all so much for making the time to chat. And I feel the lessons to be learned from the really important and audacious organizing you all are doing and have done in the state of Florida are really an important lesson for all of us thinking about creeping authoritarianism in other states and then also at the federal level. There's a lot here, and it's really been an honor to lift up these stories because I think it points to the fact that our people can continue to be protagonists in the story of this country and this world, even in the face of immense repression and backlash. So I appreciate you all so much. Thanks for making the time. It's absolutely a joy to talk to you.
Thanks, Cayden.
My thanks again to Angie, Andrea, and Eric. Check out the entire series, Insights from Florida, at the link in our show notes. This show is published by Convergence, a magazine for radical insights. I'm Cayden Mock, and our producer is Josh Elstrom. Kimmy David designed our cover art, and Trey Nitza is our summer intern. Convergence Magazine is a proud founding member of the Movement Media Alliance. If you liked what you heard, please let us know. Be sure to subscribe for more episodes, tell a friend, or rate and review the show wherever you listen. This helps us find new audiences. I can't say words. 3, 2, 1. This helps us find new audiences, and it means a lot to our team. And finally, of course, if you would like to support the work that we do at Convergence, bringing our movements together to strategize, struggle, and win in this crucial historical moment, please join our 2026 membership drive. Go to bit.ly/2026 member drive to set up your membership and get great perks too. I hope this helps.